Good morning, everybody. Very nice to see you. Thank you for coming back. We're going to begin with the beginning of Parshas Mishpatim, but like any rabbi who missed the week, I can't let Yisro completely go by. So to understand something at the beginning of Mishpatim, we just need to see the very end of Parshas Yisro. So if you begin with chapter 20, verse 20, the scene at Har Sinai has been described, the 10 commandments have been gone through. And then at the very end of the parsha, there's like a totally different mitzvah. It says, Lo sasuniti, do not make with me, Elohei chesef, Elohei zav, lo sasu lachem. We may not make divine images or idols of gold, of silver or gold. Then in verse 21, Mizbach adomat ha'aseli, make an altar from earth. All your different offerings should be brought on that altar. This is, of course, referring to Mizbeach in the Mishkan and ultimately the Beis HaMikdash. Wherever my name is mentioned, I will come to you and bless you. Verse 22. When making an altar of stone, don't use metal in molding the stone. And now verse 23, do not go up in steps up to my altar. Your private area should not be revealed, when you go up on the altar. So extremely technical point about laws involving the altar. And now we begin Parshas Mishpatim, the beginning of chapter 21. These are the laws which you should place before them. And now we start talking about the laws of a Jewish slave. And then we talk about, that's in verse 2, and then few psukim. And then we talk, I think, in verse 7 about laws of a Jewish maidservant. And then we ultimately get into laws of striking one's parents. A lot of very technical things. Of all the things that could have followed this description of Har Sinai, why is this that which followed the description of Har Sinai? And for whatever reason, this is what starts off. Is there any connection between this and the description of the altar at the very end of the previous parsha? So let's start with Rashi. Rashi of Pasuk Aleph, Ve'ela Mishpatim. Kol makom shenemar Eileh Pasalas Harishonim. Whenever a sentence begins with Eileh, these are, that actually implies a break from whatever was discussed before. Ve'eileh, but if a verse begins with and these are, that vav acts as a bridge to that which preceded it. Mosif ala rishonim. That's a follow-up on what was discussed previously. So this is not just, it happens to be the next section. There's a fundamental connection between this discussion and the previous discussion. First, globally, the previous discussion of the giving of the Torah. And on that, Rashi brings down the Mechilta, Maharishonim Sinai, Af Elu Sinai. Just like the previous discussion took place at Har Sinai, on the mountain to Moshe, so too God conveyed these laws on the mountain to Moshe. V'lama nismacha Parshas Din leParshas Mizbeach. Okay, that explains why, in general, this is connected to the previous parsha. Why is it specifically juxtaposed to the discussion of the altar? Lomar lach shetasim Sanhedrin eitzel hamikdash is a very famous halacha learned from here, that the Sanhedrin, the high court of the Jewish people, that has unique rights and responsibilities. When everything is going well for the Jewish people, the Sanhedrin should be positioned adjacent to the temple. So we imply that by juxtaposing the discussion of placing the laws before the people, and many of these laws are interpersonal laws, many of these laws are the types of things that might be decided in a Beis Din. So by juxtaposing this to the psukim about the altar, we imply that the grand Beis Din should be near the altar and, of course, the Beis HaMikdash. That's what Rashi says, a very famous idea. Let's go to the Ramban. First Ramban on the parsha, first Ramban on Pasuk Aleph. Tam ve'ela mishpatim asher tasim lefnehem. These are the laws which you should place before them. Ki ratza lahaktim lahem mishpatim. God wanted to start off with these laws. Ki kasher haya baseres hadibros hadibro rishon b'yedias Hashem va'asheni b'isra avodah zara. So what's the first of the 10 commandments? The first of the 10 commandments is recognizing God. I am Hashem, your God. The second of the 10 commandments is the prohibition of idol worship. Chazar v'tziva es Moshe kosomar b'nei Yisrael atem risem ki min hashamayim dibarti mochem. Actually, the pasuk right before we began reading, God says to Moshe, you have seen, you, the Jewish people, have seen that I spoke to you from the heavens. Shetazhirim ata od sheyitnu libam l'mashiyiru v'yizaru b'mitzvos ha'ela shetzivisim ki atem risem k'neged dibur anochi. So it's very interesting. Ramban says that first pasuk that seemed to sort of be a non sequitur to the discussion of the giving of the Torah, you saw that I spoke to you from the heavens, is a reinforcement of the first of the 10 commandments. The first of the 10 commandments is recognizing that Hashem is our God. So God now says to Moshe, tell everybody in Bnei Yisrael, remember that God spoke to us from the heavens. V'lo sasuniti, the next pasuk, then this we did read, that's the first pasuk that we read this morning. Kineged lo yiyelecha lahashlim inyan avodah zarah. It says, don't make gold or silver idols. That's a reinforcement of the second of the 10 commandments, to not do avodah zarah, to not do idol worship. Mishpatim kineged lo sachmod. And then the pasuk of placing the laws before the people, and again, Mishpatim in general connotes monetary laws. That is a reinforcement of the last of the 10 commandments, which is lo sachmod, to not covet someone else's things. Kim lo yeda ha'adam mishpat habayis o asadeh ushar hamamon yachshov shuhu shalo v'yachmedeyu v'yikal la'atzmo. I walked into a shul in Cleveland, Ohio last week, and I saw the rabbi's seat was vacant. I almost took it. It was a very natural thing for me. And, if not, then I would have realized that maybe that's not considered appropriate. Actually, I was very happy to sit other than the rabbi's seat. But theoretically speaking, who knows what a person might do? So God says, don't covet someone else's thing. And by the way, according to many of the commentators, the prohibition of not coveting someone else's thing is a lead-in to not taking someone else's thing. But how do I know? How do I know what's mine, what's yours, what's free for the taking? I don't know. I only know that if I understand the laws. So ve'ela mishpatim, the conveying of the monetary laws and the concept that there are monetary laws, which will be elaborated on throughout the rest of the Torah, that reinforces the prohibition of not coveting, meaning that a person needs to learn those laws, a person needs to consult with the appropriate authorities, because heaven forbid, a person who's trying to get something might be actually in violation of the Torah trying to get it or getting it. And that's why when it describes the monetary law, says the Ramban, it says place it before them. Mishpatim yisharim yanhigu osam beineim. They are straight laws, should be the point of guidance between the people. That people should live by these laws, not only if a court tells them to do something or not do something, obey, but not even think in the wrong way and not covet other people's things. And so too it says in the Medrash, that so much of the Torah depends on justice. Therefore, right after the 10 Commandments, God gives the concept of interpersonal laws. So too, also in this parsha, Torah talks about laws governing idol worship, the prohibition of idol worship, laws governing appropriate honoring of one's parents, laws governing murder, laws governing adultery, so much of the parsha of Mishpatim has to do with punishments or additional rules about things that were addressed on a more general scale in the 10 Commandments. So very, very interesting Ramban. Okay, but then we go on to the next pasuk. And so now we're all ready to be focused and understanding of all these interpersonal laws, and I'm not going to take someone else's money. And lo and behold, the first pasuk afterwards has to do with when you buy a Jewish slave, the terms of duty for the Jewish slave. And if I were to ask you to guess what's going to be the first monetary law in such a discussion, probably at least 75% of you would not have guessed the laws of slavery. So why is this here? it's obviously the more difficult for us because we don't even have slavery today. But even if there was slavery, why would that be? What we'd start with Ramban on Pasuk Beis, Kisik Ne'eved Ivri, Hischil HaMishpat HaRishon BeEved Ivri. We begin with the monetary discussion with laws involving a Jewish slave. B'Breishiyesh B'Shiluach HaEved B'Shana HaShviyas Zeichel Yitzias Mitzrayim HaNizkar B'Dibar HaRishon. So it's very interesting to remember, keeping the spirit that much of what we're talking about now is hearkening back to things from the Ten Commandments. So you're not allowed to own a Jewish slave forever. And when the Shemitah year comes, every 7 years, the Jewish slave goes free. And there's an aspect of the idea of the Jewish slave going free when the sabbatical year comes that harkens back to the story of the Exodus from Egypt. In Sefer Dvarim, when the Torah is talking about the freeing of the Jewish slave, it says, remember that you also were a slave in Egypt and God redeemed you. And therefore I give you this instruction to free your fellow Jew who's a slave. There's also an aspect of the laws of Jewish slavery that harkens to the creation of the world, like Shabbos. Shabbos also was one of the 10 commandments. Ki Hashana, and of course the first of the commandments spoke about the Exodus from Egypt. Ki Hashana Hashviyas le'eved Shabboson b'mleches Adonav ki Yom Hashvi'i. When does the Jewish slave go free? In year 7. When do we refrain from work? Day 7. So there's a spirit of remembering the creation of the world, and that of course both of those harken back to God's completing the active conduct of when it leading into Shabbos. There's a concept of a Jewish slave opting to stay on, but even when a Jewish slave opts to stay on, there's an absolute closure of his slavery, termination of his slavery, which is the Jubilee year, the Yovel. What's the Yovel? The Yovel is the completion of 7 Shemitah cycles, so 7 cycles of 7 years. Ki Hashvi nivchar b'yamim ub'shanim ub'shmitos, because 7 is significant on a scale of days when it comes to Shabbos, on a scale of years when it comes to Shemitah, and on a scale of Shemitah cycles when it comes to the Jubilee year. V'akol inyan echad, and all points to one thing. V'usod yimos ha'olam yibrachis ad vayichulu, and this all harkens back to the original creation of the world, of God's creation of the world. V'lachein, and therefore hamitzvah zos ru'uya lahaktim osa shenichberes ma'od. It makes sense to begin with this mitzvah once we get into monetary matters, because it's a mitzvah of great prominence. Romezes dvarim gedolim b'ma'aseh brachis, that alludes to great and lofty things regarding the creation of the world. So we discussed this morning both Rashi and the Ramban. Rashi regarding why we have the monetary discussion over here. The Ramban paints a very interesting picture connecting a series of psukim, which is a part of back to the 10 commandments. And then an interesting Ramban specifically talking about the great import of the mitzvah of the treatment of the Jewish slave.